Hi and welcome back to Like Maria. Today I'm going to talk to you about English language and how to revise. So let's get started. Now, lots of people tell me that you can't revise for English language. This is simply not true. There are plenty of things you can do in the run-up for the exam to get yourself in a good space and to get yourself writing and reading texts effectively. So, I'm going to go through some of these important ways that you can prepare yourself for the English language exam and get revising. So the first thing I recommend really highly is to read lots. Read. Look at newspapers, often widely available on the internet. Particular ones to look at might be early 20th century ones to help with the 19th century texts. Look at letters pages. These are really important ones. Often you get a letter written by someone to a newspaper complaining or expressing an opinion, and this will help you in your creative writing as well as in your analytical writing. Magazine articles are a key element of this. Look at lots of online magazines, and often the question is write a magazine article. Look at your school magazine or your school website and look at teenage writing, because often the task is about writing as a teenager for a teenage audience. I would also suggest that your 19th century literary texts, so things like A Christmas Carol, any bit of Dickens, parts of Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, etc. These are all good things to go over and read and think about how the author has structured things. The voice, the narrative techniques, the structure, the flashbacks, ways of making a story interesting. You'll be able to gain a lot from rereading those texts, and of course it's a double whammy because you'll get useful revision for English literature. I would also look at short stories and look at how they are structured and how the plot and the character and the setting are described. And I would also look at blogs, and particularly blogs by English teachers. Often on an English teacher's blog, say like Codexterous, you come across a sample essay or a sample analysis or a sample short story, and these are really easy and accessible to use. Okay, another thing you can do, which I call is making up a cheat sheet, is list phrases that you're going to need to use. Now these will be different depending on your teacher and your own vocabulary, but I've just listed 7 here that I think are good analytical phrases. And if you notice, they kind of swap things around a bit. They're not all the same. So the writer suggests that. This highlights. The phrase, quote, implies. This idea is reinforced by the use of. The choice of the adjective, X, creates a sense of. An atmosphere of X is established by. The reader is alerted to the fact that, by. So here, you're just simply writing out a list and practice handwriting them, get all the spellings correct. So for example, if you're not sure about how to spell reinforced or something like that, get it in your head and just list it and write those out. And you can have that list before you walk into the exam. Have a quick look at it. Another useful list before the exam is a list of methods. And these are methods of using language to interest and give a good impression to the reader. Adjectives and adverbs. Think of those. Nouns and verbs. Sentence structures and paragraphs. Is the text you want to create, or the text that you're analysing, incorporating some dialogue? Is it written in the first or second person? What's the setting? Is the setting going to reflect the character's feelings? Think always about the 5 senses. Has the writer used elements of the 5 senses in their description, or are you going to use some in yours? And always consider the structure of your piece. Are there going to be flashbacks? Is it going to be chronological? Is it different voices at different moments? So this list of methods is really useful when you are analysing a text, things to look out for, but also when you're creating a text, things to include. And this is a great one to have the day before the exam and just reinforce your understanding of how texts are built up. The other list you could have is some plots in your head. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have 3 or 4 plots that you then reproduce on the exam day, but I am suggesting that if you want to do the creative part of this exam and you want to do the story rather than the description at the end of the English language exam, you think about settings in the future or settings from the past. If you're given the opportunity, what year would you set it in? Think about a secret might be revealed, or something a bit supernatural. What type of ghosts or vampires would you want to write about? Think about the desert island, someone being removed from their usual way of life and stranded somewhere that they're not certain about, or perhaps going on a journey. All these types of themes are very common in the creative writing story element, so you should have ideas about these. Don't forget also that you can take inspiration from books that you've read or films that you've seen, or in fact places that you've been and stories that you've come across. So make sure that you're just being very agile and interesting in the way you're thinking about things. Another really useful thing to do is just to simply Google images. Here I've just shown you 2 photos that you could have a look at. Often the creative writing gives you a stimulus photograph or a painting, and it says write a description based on what you see in this picture. Here I've put 2 very different ones, a kind of spooky gothic house which might reveal a secret or a murder, and then a much more kind of modern picture of a woman who perhaps is finding out some bad news or some good news on the phone. Maybe she's just recently got a job, maybe you could work with something along the lines of this carriage is empty at this end, but there seems to be crowd at the other end. So what's going on there? So lots of pictures available very widely on the internet. Just pick a few and say, what would I do if this was the one that came up in the exam? I'm also going to commend you to remember rhetoric. Now, this doesn't have to be very sophisticated, but it's the things that you know and can notice in a text and you can put in your own text, particularly if it's a persuasive text. So things like the rule of 3, alliteration, repetition, rhetorical questions, lists, similes and metaphors. When you're writing your magazine article or a speech or a letter to somebody, these are the things that the examiner is going to go, oh, lovely, little bit of rhetorical question there, mixes it up, makes it persuasive. So have this simple list in your head before you go into that exam. Now, really fruitful thing that you can do, and I know it doesn't sound very exciting, but is to go through your past exams, your mock papers, look back at any work you've done in class, and read the feedback that your teachers have given you, the how-to notes on how to improve. So you've covered a lot of this in class, and simply just reading the stories that you've written or reading the texts that you've studied for this. So particularly in the comparison summary question, look at text A and look at text B and look at the older text. Look at the types of things that you've been given. And then when you've exhausted that, do a little bit of Googling, perhaps even from the same authors. So one key thing to do before the exam period, and this applies to all sorts of exams, not just English, is to know your timings and know your methods, how you're going to approach the exam. Sit down with an old paper and practice it. Look at the marks allocated to each question and decide how long you personally need for that. When you walk into the exam, it's customary for the exam people to write up on the board a time of the start. Now that's fine if it's 9 o'clock and you know your question's going to take 25 minutes and it's 9:25. But if it's 9:35 and you have to add on 25 minutes, that might throw you a little bit. So practice adding on the amount of time that you're allocated. Particularly, this is important if you have extra time. So sort out your timings. You don't want to be fussing with that in the exam. You might want to have a stopwatch or something where you can actually look at the minutes rather than the time on the clock. I would always, with English language, read all the questions before you read the text, and then start annotating with the question in your head, not just randomly, oh, there's a simile, that will be good. Know what you would use it for. And I would have several different coloured pens ready to circle things in red that are going to be for a particular question, maybe then in green for another question. So get your kit and your head and your watch sorted before you go into the exam. Last piece of advice is to try and read the examiner's mind. And by this, I don't mean guess the text and guess the questions. What I mean is being thoroughly acquainted with what the exam entails. So this will be looking at what your teachers have said about assessment objectives and which ones fit which questions. You can always go to the exam website and look at the mark schemes if you're unsure about these things. And for those of you that are really wanting to push the high marks, look at the examiner's reports on things. There will be a report from last year's exam and it will say what students did well and what students did poorly. And don't get too bogged down in this, but it might give you a little push and a little idea and a little refresh of what you're supposed to be doing. So I'm telling you that you absolutely can revise for English language. Good luck in your exams. Watch out for more videos. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.